Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted. In this episode, I want to jump on here and discuss a topic that we haven't really spent any time discussing, and that is how to support our anxious kids. With schools starting and pending transitions to family life and our kids' days, not only are we potentially seeing more meltdowns, but also we might be seeing a spike in nervousness or a sense of anxiousness overriding the thoughts and feelings of our kids. We may see our kids holding back or refusing to engage in daily activities or tears and feelings of overwhelm. So today, I want to spend some time talking through the approach occupational therapy may take to helping calm the nervous systems of our anxious kids and provide strategies for you as the parent to meet your child right where they are at. So let's just jump right in. What do we see in our anxious kids? Now, I want to give a caveat here that when I'm referring today to our anxious kids, I may be referring to kids who have a diagnosis of anxiety, and I also may be referring to kids who you as a parent notice just tend to be nervous about things and anxious about things more in a feeling or emotional word than a true diagnosis. And so when I'm talking today about anxiousness, I am sort of running the gamut of what we see in our kids and how we can be supporting them through this lens. Obviously, within a diagnosis of anxiety, there are mental health strategies, there are medication strategies, there are other strategies that we do use for our kids, but I want to keep it sort of honed into this idea of meeting our kids right where they're planted. And so when I am thinking about my kids who come into our clinic that sort of have some overriding anxiousness, I might be seeing kids who the idea of getting on the school bus is just so overwhelming, and they're so worried about where they're going to sit and who they're going to talk to and if they're going to know where to get off and if the bus is going to pick them up. Or another example that I hear often are our kids who really struggle falling asleep at night because they're so worried about what's going to happen the next day, or they don't remember if they put their toy in the place they wanted it, or they're not sure what to do about a friend situation that happens. Or another example of kids who are showing some anxiousness, who kids might be just straight up refusing to do their daily activity. They might just straight up be refusing to, get in the bathtub, or they might be refusing to leave mom's side at the class or the swimming lessons. And so when I see sort of these trends in kids that I work with through my occupational therapy lens, there's a few things that I start thinking about in order to start helping kids shift that sense of anxiety. So what is anxiety from an occupational therapy lens? It is this sense that our environment, our thoughts, our nervous system isn't safe for whatever reason. Now, this could be because we really aren't safe. So that would be a useful reason for anxiety. So for example, I might be really anxious if I'm walking along the edge of a cliff, right? That'd be a pretty appropriate reason to be pretty hyper alert in the moment so that I don't fall off the edge. But to be anxious about riding on an airplane, for example, in an adult world, might be a mismatch, right? It might be a mismatch of, am I truly about to fall off the face of the planet, or am I just a little bit nervous because this is out of my comfort zone? And so when I'm thinking about anxiousness that's sort of outsized, it's outsized for the environment, it's outsized for the expectation, it's outsized for the interaction that's happening with me and this child, is what am I seeing deep in that nervous system? Right. So we've talked about regulation over the course of this podcast and what regulation is. And as a quick reminder, our nervous system is set up to be in a couple of different states. One is a social engagement system, one where we feel pretty safe and pretty in control and pretty able to adapt. The other one is sort of a fight or a flee response. So that is, oh my gosh, something's not safe. I got to either fight it or I got to run. And so from a nervousness or an anxiousness perspective, we might see kids running away from the thing that our parent is trying to get them to do. Or we might see kids, if we say, let's get our shoes on, and they're really, really worried that the shoes aren't right or that they're not going to feel good, we might see them pushing back or throwing the shoe at us. And then that third nervous system state that we might think about seeing is our freeze response. So that's just sort of like a shutting down. Often in our really anxious kids, we see this freeze response come out. The word that parents often use is perseverating, right? They say it over and over again. But mom, you're going to pick me up at 4:00 tomorrow, right? You're going to pick me up at 4:00. Well, what happens if you don't pick me up at 4:00? I need you to pick me up at 4:00. I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't pick me up at 4:00. There's this sense of stuck. We're stuck in some way. And so that's a nervous system response that often comes out when we're seeing an anxious profile, is that freeze response. And then there is a fourth one. And our fourth one is fawn. And fawn is, I'm just going to act appropriately. I'm going to act in a way that doesn't cause any ruffles or ripples so that I know that I will be accepted. This one's a little bit trickier. Our fawn response within anxiousness are often our kids that we see that go to school and the teacher thinks they're just the best and they just have all the friends and they do so well throughout their day. They just do so well and strive and thrive. And then they get home and it often comes out at night. It often comes out right before bed where like the hinges come off and the meltdown and the overwhelm comes out. And so sometimes that pattern of anxiousness is a little bit trickier to identify because during the day or much of the time, the parent is like, man, my kid's really doing well. So what in the world's going on during this one period where sort of all of this emotion and thought and nervousness and worry is coming out? And so that's another cue that I look for as an occupational therapist when I start trying to piece apart what kind of strategies I want to use for my anxious kids. And so as a parent who's listening right now, who might have a child who runs a little more anxious or a little more nervous in certain situations, think through what pattern you're seeing in your child from their nervous system perspective, because that's going to give us some clues as to what we want to do in order to really support our children's nervous systems to know that they're safe and connected. When we're in a safe and connected nervous system, we're able to use our frontal lobe, our thinking brain, in order to problem solve. So that's our whole goal, and to change our thought patterns around the things that we're nervous about. We're able to challenge ourselves. Like, is this airplane thing a really big deal? Or am I just nervous because I'm up in the sky and it doesn't make a lot of sense that I should be safe up in this airplane? Or is this a time when I really maybe should be pretty nervous and pretty high alert? Yeah, maybe. It allows us to think through as opposed to just letting our nervous system take over. The other thing I'm going to look at when I'm really observing our anxious kids, when I'm observing what functionally like how it's impacting their everyday, is is there a sense of sort of hyper checking that's happening in these moments of nervousness or anxiousness with kids that I'm working with or kids that I'm supporting parents with? And when I think about that, I'm really thinking about, is there a sense that if sort of everything goes exactly as the child planned, that they're able to sort of march through it. But if there's one little wrinkle in the plan, let's say we left 5 minutes later for swimming than we meant to, that it all falls apart and we turn into a worried, nervous mess. That's a clue for me from an occupational therapy perspective that potentially we're really wanting to kind of slide in and support our children with something called motor planning or breaking down a task, which is a skill that we learn starting in infancy and sort of moving all the way up through adulthood. And if we don't necessarily have this skill solid, it can really come out looking like a child who really is worried all the time. It's very hyper checking, making sure, Mom, you're going to pick me up at 4. Mom, what happens if the door is locked? Mom, what happens if you don't pick up the phone? What happens if we get a lot of that checking in our kids where that might be that motor planning, that praxis might be a piece that's breaking down for them. The third thing that I'm going to really assess and I want to look at as an OT for my more anxious kids is what's that underlying emotion that the child is expressing? Yes, they're expressing nervousness, they're expressing worry, they're expressing anxiousness, but is there anything else underneath there? And what I mean by that is, am I seeing an unmet need? So we've talked about how emotions speak to unmet needs in this podcast. Every emotion ties into a basic human need that's either being met or being unmet in our kids. Well, and in all of us. Sometimes in our really anxious kids, it's a sense of competence, right? That need for competence or autonomy. I can be my own person. I can be competent at what's being asked of me. I know that I'm being seen is another one that comes out a lot with my kids who are showing a lot of anxiousness. And when I see that, again, it gives me clues as to how I want to support the child to create the sense of safety, to support the unmet need, in order to allow them to experience life without that layer of anxiety or worry. And then the fourth thing that I'm really looking at from an OT when I'm seeing nervous or anxious kids is there a relational component to this? So we have, again, talked a lot about parent-child relationship, attachment. And what I mean by that is, am I seeing the child really struggling to move away from their parent? Is that sort of a trend I see? I'll give an example that one of my kids was a very good, competent gross motor, very good at movement, very active. However, they were unable to participate in any of the little kid classes, soccer, swimming, gymnastics, any of those little kid classes without me literally being right next to them in their early life. So I'm talking up until about the age of 6. They were so worried with the idea of me not being right there next to them that it became unfunctional. They were not able to participate in the class. Either I needed to be right there next to them, which wasn't allowed, frankly, and it wasn't appropriate for the activity, or if I tried to remove myself, their anxiety and their sense of worry was so big that it became miserable and they weren't able to participate. And so that's an example of a relational component to anxiety. That idea that, for my child, I need mom right there next to me. And in this case, it was attachment based and it was co-regulation based. Mom is the one who knows how to make everything okay. So therefore, if mom's not there, I can't do it. And so when I see this relational component, again, it gives me a clue as to where I can go with it. Is this about some attachment and co-regulation work that we want to be doing between parent and child? Or conversely, is the child really nervous about moving toward another person? So these are our kids who often struggle with joining kids, joining the group, joining a playground or a friendship. And so when I see that is another relational component to that nervousness or the anxiety, which then tells me that there's probably some shifts in social skills. There's probably some shifts potentially in sensory processing that we could look at in order to support the nervous system anxiety there. I want to give you as the parent some clues as to what we're seeing with our really nervous and anxious and worried kids. And I want to start looking at this through the lens that allows us to start ditching the story in our heads as parents, right? We all have this story. We all come up with a story as parents of, oh, my child just really likes to be at home, right? Or, oh, they just really don't like to try new things. Or once I leave, they'll be just fine. Or they're just testing me. Or, yeah, they were just born whiny or sensitive or emotional. So these are stories that we have that we place on our kids. And I'm encouraging you, especially with our really anxious and worried kid, to pull back from that story and get curious about the clues that our kids are giving us. And so from this OT lens, I'm looking at clues. I'm looking at nervous system clues. I'm looking at sensory clues. I'm looking at relational cues. I'm looking at emotional clues, which then provides me opportunity to provide strategy to you as the parent and to the child. Helps the child really begin to understand themselves, helps the child really be able to see themselves. And by parenting through this lens, we're working on really seeing our children, which lets us show up for them with appropriate strategies and therefore reducing that anxiety, right? Reducing that need to pull on the worry and the nervousness as the sort of the first line of defense. Let's spend a few minutes now just talking about some strategies. What do we do, right? When we have these kids who are really nervous and anxious. I know as I'm recording this, kids are just about to go back to school. And I've got, a lot of parents calling in and emailing in and talking to therapists about, I can't get my child out of the car. They're so nervous. They don't know they don't know how to get out of the car and get into the school. I have to carry them. How am I going to do this? Right. So these are like big worries, big nervousness. And, and a lot of times it becomes pretty traumatic for both the parent, the child, and the teacher in order to make this transition. So the first thing I want to really think about with you from a strategy perspective is what can we do to create a sense of known for our kids in these moments, not only within the routine, but also within the environment. And so what I mean by this is that when we know sort of that there's a worry pattern, right? We know that, bedtime is usually when the worries pop up. Is there environmental cues of safety that we can put in for our kids? Is there a cozy space in their bed that they go every time? Is there a comfort item that they can use? I know for a lot of kids, they've got, the blinkies or the stuffies or whatever that kind of grow up with them from infancy. Can you just hand them that safety cue when you notice it? How can we provide external environment that cues safety? So, right, think about the sensory environment. We've talked about the sensory systems a little bit. Can we decrease noise? Can we decrease lights? Can we create coziness around the body? Can we create a little bit of sense of snuggle, tight, comfy around the body when we're noticing that nervousness and anxiety? Can we use our prosody of our voice in order to create that sense of known? Can we go into something where our tone and our prosody, so that's sort of how we talk, that's the sing-songiness of our voice, creates some sort of known? Again, this is going off of the clue that our child is giving us that maybe they're in that fight, flight, or freeze state. And so we're using everything we've got environmentally and everything we've got in ourself to create some known. Now, this isn't going to necessarily solve the problem, stop the anxiety. But what it is going to do is without words, cue the nervous system to safety. And so this is the one that parents often forget. They start going into problem solving, verbally problem solving or fixing, which is a reasonable step, but it's also not the first step. The first step is, I've got you. You're safe. Your environment is safe. I am safe. The second thing that is off of this that I really highlight as a strategy is you are to lead by example. You are the adult who is leading by example through co-regulation. Now remember, co-regulation is that idea that my nervous system regulation impacts yours and yours impacts mine. So if I am nervous and anxious about dropping my child off for school, and I'm showing it, even not with my words, but with my face and with my body and with my breath, that is going to transfer to my child. My child will sense that co-regulation effect of something's not okay here, and it will impact their nervous system and vice versa. So as an adult, we have the opportunity to guide and lead our children right through it. Now, for my anxious parents out here, right? So my parents who are like, ooh, that's me. I'm anxious all the time. It's your superpower to some effect. It's your superpower to lead your child through the strategies of what to do when you're anxious, because you have the experience in your own body. And so how do you soften it for yourself? How do you remind yourself around safety cues? Your child is tuning into all of that. And so therefore, you're able to teach them through yourself and through your own managing of your nervous system and settling it out of anxiety into safety for yourself. We will spend the next couple episodes coming up here actually diving deep again into co-regulation and leading our children through that. So I'm going to move on to the next strategy, which this one is sort of sometimes counterintuitive, but let our children be heard. Let them be heard in like what they're nervous about. Now, we're not going to let them be stuck, right? So we talked about how sometimes that nervous system gets really stuck in all of the things. But first, we really do need to be heard. So I hear that you're nervous about walking into school. I wonder if you're nervous about walking into school because you don't know where you're going to go, or because the teacher's going to walk up to you and ask you how your weekend was and you don't know what to say, or it's so overwhelming when you walk into school. I hear you. Do you see how really truly hearing our child also gives us clues as to strategy and how we can really support them? If we don't hear our children and just go into problem solving, Johnny, I know that you're nervous to walk into school, but remember, you're going to be okay and you're going to have such a fun day today. Do you see how that just diminished everything about their experience and didn't match anything that they were feeling internally in their body, which is what we're trying to support in order for them to be able to learn to regulate themselves? And so by truly hearing our kids and what they're worried about and restating it for them and clarifying it for them helps us move towards that frontal lobe and that thinking brain. It helps them know that they are not the only ones who need to hold this kind of yucky nervous system state, but that we as the adult are strong enough to be able to help hold it with them so that we can now be on the same page and on the same team to work together to solve the problem. The fourth strategy that I want to give you is predict the behavior. We've talked about predict the behavior a little bit in terms of meltdowns, but in the world of anxiety and anxiousness and worry, it can work like a charm. And so I talked a little bit about kids who might struggle with problem solving or kids who might struggle with knowing what all the steps are going to be. And so one of the strategies is to predict the behavior. And what that means is helping them see what all of the outcomes might be so that they have an image of it in their head, especially for our neurodivergent kids, and can sort of feel it before they experience it. So what predict the behavior might be is I'm going to drop you off at swimming today, and I bet you'll be really nervous. And you might even sit right on the edge of the pool and look back and see if mommy's still there. Mommy will still be there. And then you're probably going to swim 3 times. And then the class will be over, and mommy's going to give you a big hug. Do you see how I just predicted out what might happen? I didn't diminish the experience, but I predicted out what might happen so that the child could really feel that emotional arc and feel that sort of dysregulatory sense while they're still next to you and in safety. It's a way of practicing. It's a way of practicing that nervous system shift within the context of the safe relationship. Another example of this might be, wow, I know you're excited for the sleepover and you're really, really nervous. I wonder if you're nervous about what will happen when it's dinner time and then you have to get your sleeping bag out and you're not sure where you're going to put it. I bet you'll find an open spot on the floor and put your sleeping bag there. And then I know that when you watch that movie tonight, you're really looking forward to it. And this is based on information that, the child is motivated by this movie. And so do you see how I'm sort of stepping the child through the steps? I'm predicting what's going to happen, and I'm not just making it rosy. I'm predicting all the way through. The reason I'm doing this, again, is to help that nervous system settle into known. Because when we have known and when we have predictability, it decreases our worry and our anxiety. The next strategy is similar to predicting the behavior, but it really even hits on that occupational therapy skill of what I call motor planning and praxis even more. And that's breaking it down to build success. Now, let me quick define for you, again, motor planning / praxis. For any activity that we do as humans, we need to first have an idea, right? The idea might be, I don't know, I'm going to go make myself a cup of coffee. Then we have this plan that needs to happen. So there are all of these steps that I need to do in order to be able to make a cup of coffee, right? I need to be able to get up. I got to open the door. I got to go find the kitchen. I got to put the coffee in. I've got to turn it on, right? There's many, many steps in order to make the coffee. And then my body actually has to comply, right? So this is like balance and coordination and not getting distracted by the shiny thing next to me and all of the things that my body actually has to do. And sometimes it goes awry, right? I might go to make my coffee and somebody might stop me in the hallway and ask me a question. And now I got to reorient and get back to my steps. And so this idea of motor planning and praxis for so many of our kids can really break down. It can really break down and it looks pretty hidden. It often looks like a kid who's being obstinate or a kid who's saying, no, I'm not going to, or a kid who's saying, you have to help me all the time, Mom. And so when I'm thinking about breaking it down, I might help my child with 6 of the 7 steps. I might be like, do you know what? Today to get in the car, I know going to school is really tricky. I'm going to grab your backpack. I'm going to get your shoes on. And what I want you to do is just walk to the car. I'll meet you right there. Right? Do you see how I just gave them one step? I broke it down. Or, you know what? Today, I know you're really, really nervous about piano lessons. Today, we're just going to go and I want you to meet the teacher and then we're going to leave. I'm just breaking it down into one little piece so that there could be a positive experience and so that the nervous system can know that it's safe. And so sometimes by breaking the task down is a really nice strategy to support our nervous kids. And then the last strategy I want to give you today is when our kids are really, really stuck, when we're seeing a lot of worry and anxiety, is confidently leading their kids to the next step. Right? So sometimes when our children are in that really big sort of freeze, like cycle, like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And they're kind of hyper fixating a little bit. After we've used all these strategies, right? We're going to co-regulate. We're going to create the sense of known. We're going to lead by example. We're going to let them be heard. The next step for parents is to confidently lead them to the next step. I hear all these things, kiddo, and this is after talking and working it through. And now we're going to go have dinner. So I'm leading them to the next safety step. I'm not diminishing their experience, but like, I've got you. And now we're going to move on to the next thing. And confidently leading our kids to the next step, again, helps them know that this sense of freeze, this sense of nervous and worry doesn't have to be forever, because nobody wants to be in that forever. It's scary. And so it's our job as a parent to help them move to the next thing. And that doesn't mean they're not going to circle back in 20 minutes or 5 minutes or tomorrow with the worry, anxiety. But now they know that it can move forward, right? And so we're just leading them on to the next piece, which is, again, a regulation tool, and it's a functional tool, right? Our life sort of moves on, a routine marches on, and we can be okay even if we're worried or anxious about something. And so if you're raising one of our really nervous, worried, anxious kiddos, I know that it can really impact us as parents, right? Just as much as our kiddos who are melting down and having big, blow-ups and big behaviors. And so really thinking about that story that we're telling ourselves around our kiddo, really looking at what we're seeing and trying to break it down, trying to really understand what's under it from an occupational therapy lens, can really help give our children some strategies and help give us some strategies to be able to get through the day just a little bit more successfully. So I think I'm going to leave it there today. Thanks so much. Hello, Where They're Planted listeners. I wanted to pop on here and remind you of our Thriving Parents Collective online courses. If you like what you hear on this podcast and are seeking more, check out this resource. This course offers you over 9 educational videos and 50 pages of self-reflective workbook in order to guide you through the process of integrating connected parenting strategies into your day-to-day life. Listen when it's convenient for you and use the content as the foundation for a shared language between you and your partner or family members. In addition, access one-to-one sessions with a parent coach to support individualized strategies to help you meet your child right where they're planted. For listeners, access this course for $99 by using the code THRIVING at the checkout. We look forward to having you join our Thriving Parents Collective. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.